ESPN's Buster Olney thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits with Armen and Levack. And Buster, yesterday, Joe Girardi goes to the bullpen and uses Dylan Betances and Andrew Miller. Significant time when the Yankees were once up by 11 runs. Do you understand that move yesterday?
No, not at all. And it was shocking to watch it as it played out. And I give credit to David Cohn and Michael Kay and John Flaherty on the Yankees broadcast because, they're not in an easy position because they work for the team, but you could hear it in their voices, too, that their reaction was like, what? The fact that Dylan Betances is getting up in the bullpen and beginning to throw when the Yankees were ahead by 7 runs. And he came into the game when they're ahead by 6 runs. Yes, there were runners on base, but still a huge lead. And then Andrew Miller came in and pitched when they were ahead by 5 runs in the 9th inning. At some point, you think during the whole process, someone might be saying in the dugout, you know what, we don't like the fact that the lead's eroding, but we've got 2 or 3 other guys down there who've been pretty good for us this year. Maybe Adam Warren would be a guy that they, for example, that they could have turned to in that situation to stabilize in the late innings and try to work to avoid to use Betances and Miller. Betances has thrown more pitches than any other relief pitcher in the American League. His use has been heavy. Andrew Miller's use has been heavy. And they're now beginning a stretch where I believe they have only one more off day after today for the rest of the season. They need those 2 guys. They're going to need them a lot. They've got to play the Blue Jays 7 times in a span of 10 days. They need those guys to be relatively fresh, and they're going to need them in the postseason. And so to the idea that you're bringing up those 2 guys when you're ahead by 5 or 7 runs, no matter how anxious you might feel, there needs to be some self-discipline, so you're not doing that.
Buster, is it too strong to say that Joe Girardi has taken a strength of this team in the bullpen and he's turning it into a weakness?
Well, it hasn't happened, but that's what happens when you run the risk of that. And we've seen examples of that in the past where, for 2 years, Johnny Venters of the Atlanta Braves was arguably the best reliever in baseball with this nasty 2-seam fastball that went straight downhill. And the Braves basically pounded on him like a nag. They used him all the time, and he wound up breaking apart. And, he was right near the list of guys who pitched the most in baseball. And one of the guys in the bullpen along with him, Eric O'Flaherty, the same thing. He was great, but they used him all the time. And both those guys, Venters hasn't pitched in the big leagues in 3 years, and O'Flaherty, has been in and out of rosters because of injuries in recent seasons. And to me, you got to protect a guy like Dylan Betances. And the idea that you would use him in situations when you certainly could turn to other people, it doesn't bode well for you in 2015, but beyond, because he's such an unusual weapon.
ESPN's Buster Olney with Armen and Levack, thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. Buster, is there something specifically we can point to and say maybe Girardi hasn't had as much experience with this in the big leagues? With Mariano Rivera being that go-to guy in the 8th and definitely the 9th inning for so stinking long, did that maybe cloud judgment or not give him experience in cases like this where he's making decisions that aren't right? And for this, you know what I'm saying? Is that a stretch?
Well, theoretically, when he took over as manager of the Yankees, the strength of Joe, being a former catcher who has worked with pitchers his entire life, was that this was something he was going to be good at. I think there have been times in the past when he has been good at it. But for whatever reason this year, and maybe it's because the Yankees haven't made the postseason the last couple of years, it seems like that he's pushing the issue much more than I would have expected. And you guys remember, during Joe Torre's tenure, there were a lot of good things that Joe did, and to me, he was a really important figure in the fact that in that time when the Yankees won 4 championships in 5 years and played in the World Series 5 times. But without a doubt, his weakness as manager was how he would run through relievers. And it's like they're pelts on a wall someplace for him. Scott Proctor and Paul Quantrill and Steve Carsey and Tanyan Sturtz, and he would just go to the same guys over and over and over again. And I don't know if that was just Joe's anxiety or if it's Girardi's anxiety now, but it needs to stop from the Yankees organization point of view, because you have these 2 guys who are, if they're kept healthy and they're relatively rested, they're 2 of the best 3-4 relievers in baseball.
Buster, can the Yankees limp into the playoffs with Mark Teixeira missing a couple weeks?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. Now, they may, wind up, sort of scraping by. They have all those games against the Blue Jays, who look like a juggernaut right now. But I do think that they're one of the 4 or 5 best teams in the American League. And there's a gap. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think as of this morning, their chances statistically to make the postseason are around 93-94%. So they could do that. And in a one-game playoff, you know what? You probably take your chances with a Masahiro Tanaka if, in fact, you can put yourself in a situation where you line him up to pitch one game, because that's all it would be. And, maybe it'll be against the Texas Rangers, who are a dangerous team. Maybe it'll be against the Houston Astros. But I absolutely think they could get through that.
ESPN's Buster Olney, thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. Didi Gregorius, first half of the season, we were saying, what's wrong with him? And Buster, now the question about Didi Gregorius is, what do you think his full potential is?
Well, and I'm going to defer to scouts who know a lot more than I do. They don't think he's ever going to be a great hitter. They think he's going to be, a guy who hits you 10 to 15 home runs a year, who's going to hit you, for decent average. But you know what? I mean, isn't that all he needs to be, given how strong he is defensively? And if you look at his wins above replacement for this year, that stat WAR, he is, I believe at this point, he's 2.5 wins better than Derek Jeter was for all of last year. And Didi Gregorius, despite the fact he had that slow start, right now he ranks among the top 10 shortstops in the majors in that number. And I just, watching him play, he just seems to get more and more comfortable, by the week. And you do wonder if maybe he's going to even be better offensively than what scouts think, just because it just seems like that you're talking about a guy who maybe hasn't played as much amateur baseball as other players, and as he gets more comfortable, he's going to wind up learning some things.
Buster, Carlos Beltran hits his 500th career double on Monday. There's 10 players who have done that. Bond's the only one not in the Hall of Fame. Is Carlos Beltran a Hall of Famer?
He's got a real shot, and I think as time goes on, and give him credit for digging out that early season hole. But it looks like not only is he one of the Yankees' best hitters right now, but he could be a guy who could help them next year. And a few years ago, when he was with the St. Louis Cardinals, it was before he signed with the Yankees. I had a long conversation with him during batting practice one time, in between his rounds. And he talked about, that there were definitely milestones that he wanted to reach. And one of them was 400 homers. No question, he wants to go down in history as having more home runs than any player from his homeland. And I think that's something that's going to push him going forward. I think he's a borderline case right now, but I think as time goes on, especially when you add in his tremendous record in the postseason, which is one of the best in history, then I personally think that he's going to have a real good shot.
He's Buster Olney. Thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits in Latham Farms. The Mets are going to skip a start for Harvey. Buster, you absolutely dissected this situation today on your blog. Make sure to check it out, ESPN.com. It's worth a few bucks a month to become an insider, to look at every angle that Buster analyzes this decision. In summary, Buster, is it the right decision for Matt Harvey to have start skipped at this time?
Well, I don't even know if there's necessarily a decision based on what's happened. Essentially, and you know what, if there was a decision to be made, it may have been that the Mets made the mistake by not dealing with this early in the year. Here's the deal. Doctors have recommended that Matt Harvey be limited this year to 180 innings, okay? And this is not, just merely a situation where you have a team trying to limit a young pitcher, the number of innings he throws. This is a pitcher who's coming back from Tommy John surgery, who's been working with some of the best doctors in the world. And their recommendation was 180 innings. He's now at 166 in the third innings. And I think because of what happened with Strasburg a few years ago with the Washington Nationals, there's a feeling, you hear some fans, you even hear people in baseball say it, well, you know what, Strasburg should have just pitched through it and said, I'm going to pitch anyway. And maybe that's how people are going to feel about Matt Harvey with this. But here's the thing. If you have the foremost medical experts in the world telling a team you need to limit this player to 180 innings, who exactly, and what's the ethical responsibility of the team to honor that? Because in a parallel world, if you had in the NFL, you had a player coming back from concussion, and the doctor said, well, you need to follow this protocol, and, would you have teams now ignoring that? Absolutely not. If he was coming back from a broken leg and the doctor said, well, you need to limit him to X, Y, and Z in terms of his activity, would anyone think about blowing past those recommendations or ignoring them? No. And that's what's going to make this really interesting. I think it's going to become a lot more of an issue than people realize now. I wrote about it about 4 to 5 days ago that this thing was sort of looming out there. And, keep in mind, they still have 3 weeks to go in the regular season. They're going to make the postseason. I don't know how they're going to deal with the innings limit. I know that Terry Collins has talked about, him being a horse who's going to lead us. Who exactly is the one who's going to say, yeah, it's a good idea for Matt Harvey to blow past the recommendations of the best surgeons in the world and to, pitch 210, 220 innings? I think it's a lot more complicated than what people think.
Mets look like they're a lock for the postseason. Is Matt Harvey going to be there with them?
I don't know. I think he's going to be, but I don't know what you're going to have to do to get there. Now, and this is, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, I think we can say, how come they didn't address this early on? I mean, we've seen a lot of teams now what they'll do, and the Yankees actually did this with Luis Severino this year. They hold back the reins on a pitcher, limit the innings early in the year so that they are available later in the year. And, now that the Mets are addressing this issue, the question is, how are they going to use these handful of innings they have left with them? Because you would assume that probably if they play in the division series, and let's say for argument's sake they go to the National League Championship Series, the World Series, you might have 3 or 4 more starts. That could be somewhere in the range of 20 to 28 innings. That's obviously beyond what the recommendations are, and that's not even accounting for any more innings in the regular season. If I'm guessing now, I wonder if they're going to do something where they'll do some kind of a tune-up appearance later in the regular season, try to save some of these innings for the postseason.
Buster Olney with Armen and Levack. Thanks to All-Star Wine and Spirits. So according to the limit that the doctors put before the season began, Matt Harvey only has less than 14 innings left before he hits that limit. So, Buster, it's pretty clear he will go over that limit this year.
I would assume so.
Right.
Given the time and given the fact now, if they go out quickly in the playoffs, maybe they don't. I just don't know, how. I know the Mets internally feel like they have a handle on this, but Jason Stark on the podcast that he did with him today related a conversation he had with Sandy Alderson, the Mets general manager, in which Sandy said, look, there's not any necessarily medical science attached to some of these innings limits. You know what? That may or may not, you could argue that, but I think in the case when someone's coming back from Tommy John, it's a different situation because there actually is a lot of medical history related to these guys coming back from elbow reconstructions, and you've got the best doctors in the world saying this is what you need to do. And look, Sandy Alderson may have slept at a Holiday Inn last night, but I don't know if he's necessarily the one who can say, just ignore the best medical advice in the world and go ahead and pitch and it'll all be fine.
Yeah. Armen and Levack, 104.5 The Team with ESPN's Buster Olney. I hear you slept at a Holiday Inn last night. Who's going to win the NL Cy Young? That looks to be easy today, right?
Oh, goodness. It's a fascinating decision, and Zach Greinke has the lowest ERA in baseball by far. But I do think that Clayton Kershaw has really complicated this by how incredibly well he's pitching in the last couple of months. He's in his typical second-half drive, and in fact, some of the Cubs players that I spoke with the day after he pitched last Friday in L.A. told me they think that Clayton Kershaw right now is pitching the best he ever has because he's commanding both sides of the strike zone. And think about this. I mean, we don't hear numbers like this from pitchers. Last night against the Giants, he generated 35 missed swings. That's the most in the last decade by any pitcher in any game. He faced 32 hitters last night. And Levack, I mean, you can translate this. 30 first pitch strikes to 32 hitters. That's almost inhuman. You can't line up a pitching machine that can do that.
I mean, I've never seen it. I not that I can recall that kind of domination just to catch everybody off that first swing no matter what. That's amazing.
Yeah, for me, if I had a vote today and I don't, and I had a ballot, I think I would pick Kershaw, but I totally get why someone else would pick Greinke or maybe consider Jake Arrieta of the Cubs.
He's Buster Olney. Glad you're back from vacation, my friend. It's good to have you. ESPN.com. Go sign up to be an insider. It is over the top worth it. Buster, we'll do it again next week, man.
Sounds good, guys.